Are some sugars better than other sugars, or is sugar just sugar? Is there a difference between natural sugar versus added sugar? We are going to answer these questions today in this video, which is about all things sugar. So stay tuned for this video. One you're not going to want to miss. I'm going to talk about the difference between natural sugars and added sugars. I'm going to speak to you also about some common myths about sugar, and then we're going to wrap it up with some practical tips for how you can decrease your sugar intake in general. All right, we're going to dive straight into this video. Natural sugars and artificial sugars. What are natural sugars? So essentially, natural sugars are those that are found in foods by nature. Naturally, we did not add them. They basically have been there. So natural sugars are in your fruits, in your vegetables. We also have natural sugars in dairy. So milk has sugar. The milk sugar is called lactose, and that lactose is actually half galactose and half glucose. So glucose, of course, is the thing we're concerned about when we're measuring our blood sugar levels. So natural sugar in all these things. We have some sweeter vegetables like carrots and beets, and then we have sweet potatoes. That's the type of starch. Starch is also sugar, but is a string of glucose molecules together. So in that form, it doesn't taste quite sweet, but we have some of these starches such as sweet potato and some tropical starches. There's something called breadfruit, which is a starchy fruit that grows on a tree. And so, you know, these are just some of the forms of naturally occurring sugars. Of course, all your fruits that taste sweet, those contain natural sugars as well. Fruit sugar classically is fructose, but there can be any combination of fructose and glucose in fruits as well. So those are your natural sugars. They are naturally occurring in nature. Nobody had to add them there. Now compare that to added sugar. Added sugar could be in either of two ways. It could be that you externally added some sort of sweetness, some sort of sugar. Either it is regular sucrose, cane sugar, or maybe it's maple syrup, or maybe it's agave nectar or agave syrup, some sweet thing that you added to whatever the food or drink is to make it taste sweeter. So that's the added one. Now, I also would consider an unnatural sugar to be sugar that's unnaturally concentrated in the food. So you might have a concentrated fruit juice because it was heated and some of the water was evaporated off of it. So what is left is abnormally sweet. So it's not necessarily added, but it's abnormally sweet because it's abnormally concentrated. Similarly, with milk sugar, if you have lactose, or rather milk or dairy that is fat-free, it means that the fat was removed, and as a result, you have a higher concentration of lactose, the milk sugar, relative to the other macronutrients in the milk. Okay, so normally milk has almost equal parts of the carbohydrate, which is lactose, protein, and fat. If you remove the fat, then the balance of the remaining protein and sugar or lactose will be off, and so relatively speaking, you're going to have a higher concentration of lactose, and therefore that is going to give you a higher effect or more dramatic effect on your blood sugar levels, right? So abnormally concentrated amount of sugar is almost like adding sugar to it because you removed water, so the balance is off. Okay, so those are the differences between added sugar and natural sugar, right? Now, why do we care about the difference? What's the effect of this difference? Well, the fact is that if you have an abnormally high concentration of sugar, right, it means that you're going to have way more of that going into your bloodstream. So compare that to natural sugars. Sugars naturally are in a matrix with fiber and other nutrients. So we spoke about the fat in milk, but then you have fiber and then you have protein. So for example, nuts have sugar, right? Nuts that you eat, almond nuts, cashews, and so on, but they come with fiber, they come with protein, and they come with fat. Therefore, your body has to do some work before it can get to the sugar. It has to break down the other macronutrients to get to the sugar. In that process of breaking down all the nutrients, it's going to be a slower release of sugar into your bloodstream. So that's the naturally occurring sugar. Same with vegetables. You have to chew and you have to break down the fiber and slowly get that sugar released into your bloodstream. Compare that to added sugar or unnaturally concentrated forms of sugar where it's such a high concentration, there's not much between the sugar molecules, so you don't have fiber and fat and so on diluting or separating the sugar molecules. So just that high concentration is going to it's going to more quickly get into your bloodstream, and because it's quickly getting into your bloodstream, it means that it's going to carry up your blood sugar levels much higher. So that's unnatural. That's an unnatural effect of these added sugars or higher concentrated sugars. Okay, so I think you have a good understanding now of added versus natural sugars and why it's important because of how differently these affect our body and our, I guess, energy supply and energy distribution, so to speak. Okay, what are some of the common myths as it relates to natural versus artificial sugars? Well, one myth is that all sugars are bad, right? And that, that we know that's not the case, because we already said that if the sugar comes naturally with fiber, then it's not bad because it's going to be released into our bloodstream in a more natural, gentle fashion. Okay. Another myth is that, if it's a naturally occurring sugar, that's a little better than unnatural sugar. So some people think that honey is better than sucrose, cane sugar, right? Sugar is sugar in the grand scheme of things. Some people think that maple syrup is better than agave syrup, right? So these natural forms like honey and maple syrup, some people think, oh, that's much better. But the fact is, sugar is sugar. It's still going to have approximately 50% glucose, 50% fructose. There may be variations in that, but in the grand scheme of things, if you add 1 teaspoon of honey into your tea, it's going to be more or less the same as adding 1 teaspoon of table sugar into your tea, right? So sugar is sugar. It doesn't matter. You should consider the amounts similarly for all the different types, okay? And then another thing is that some people feel, another myth is that if the label says sugar-free, then it's good for you. But the first thing you have to ask when you see sugar-free on the label is that, okay, if they remove the sugar, what did they put in place of the sugar? Okay, did they put in some sort of artificial sugar, right? Or did they load it up with some other type of additive that you might not want? So sugar-free does not necessarily mean good. In fact, sometimes in sugar-free foods, they put sugar alcohols, which depending on the type of sugar alcohols, it may have the very same effect on your blood sugar levels, or maybe even worse, especially depending on how much food you eat, because you might have a false sense of security that this thing is good for you. So definitely not necessarily the case that sugar-free means it's automatically good. In fact, if you have a naturally occurring food, you should not have to put any label on it, because it should be pretty obvious that this is a natural food with the natural occurring sugars in it. You shouldn't need a label for that, okay? What are some practical tips for reducing your everyday, sugar intake or sugar consumption? Well, one is to read the labels, like I alluded to, right? Read not just the fact at the front that it says sugar-free or low sugar or safe for diabetics. You want to flip that label over and look at the long list of ingredients. Hopefully the ingredient list is not very long. Hopefully it's 5 or less. But either way, you need to look at the list to see, is there sugar mentioned anywhere in it? And you have to be aware that there is sugar. There are many names for sugar. So they might have cane sugar, then they might have turbinado sugar, then they might have concentrated fruit juice, and all sorts of names for sugar, right? So you need to look to see if there's any added sugar. And then the second thing you need to do is see how much on the total carbohydrates you need to see, including added sugars, how many grams of added sugar. Ideally, the recommended daily allowance for added sugar is no more than 24 grams per day. Every 4 grams is equal to 1 teaspoon. So if you're adding sugar to your tea or whatever, it should be no more in a total a full day. You should have no more than 6 teaspoons of added sugar, ideally. The less, the better for you, but definitely no more than 6 teaspoons or no more than 24 grams of added sugar per day. So read your labels. That's one tip for reducing added sugar. Another tip is to choose whole foods. So if you're going to go to the produce section of the supermarket or just go to the market, you're getting the foods as they were produced in nature with the naturally occurring sugars in the natural matrix of whatever that food is, right? And then the last thing is that for sweet things, if you're accustomed to candy or you have a sweet tooth, then you want to choose natural forms of sweets. The best is fruits, any and every variety of fruits. Some fruits are sweeter than others. If you're diabetic, you need to sort of beware about, the types of fruits. You can't go wrong with berries because those have way more fiber compared to the amount of sugars in them. So that's good. And then you have the good tartness of berries as well that helps to satisfy sweet tooth, right? So those are just a few tips for controlling your added sugar intake. So just essentially to recap, natural versus added sugars. Natural sugars are in foods as they were supplied to you from nature, right? And then added sugar is what you added, or if it's an abnormally concentrated juice where you have an abnormally high concentration of sugar, or even fat-free milk has an abnormally high concentration of the milk milk sugar. Essentially, with added sugars, those are going to carry up your blood sugar much higher than naturally occurring sugars that are slowed down by fiber, fat, and protein. And just beware the myths, beware fancy labels. And at the end of the day, you want to look at these labels, study them, and have in your mind that you should aim for no more than 6 teaspoons or 24 grams of added sugar in a 24-hour period. I hope you all found this video helpful, and if you did, definitely share it with somebody else who you think will benefit from this information. Take care, and I will see you on the next video. Bye-bye.